name is Daniela Romashodu, and my research project will be covering creatine monohydrate and its efficacy in elite track and field 400-meter dash sprint performance for females. Introduction. So what is creatine monohydrate? Creatine monohydrate is a creatine complex with a molecule of water. Creatine is a natural amino acid derivative made up of glycine, arginine, and methionine. Silver, 1999. Creatine monohydrate is the most common and efficacious form of creatine to take as a dietary supplement. It serves as a physiological sports ergogenic aid and is purported to improve high-intensity athletic performance and increase fat-free mass. Persky and Brazil, 2001. So here are the basics of track and field. Track and field is a competitive, mostly individual sport that involves field and running events. The track is oval-shaped, made from polyurethane, comprised of 8 lanes, and is a total of 400 meters in distance. These are some necessary track and field skills. Track and field athletes must be able to perform all-out running / sprinting, so the 100-meter dash, 200-meter dash, and 400-meter dash. Track and field athletes must also be having jumping capabilities, long jump and high jump. And track and field athletes should also have throwing capabilities for events like the shot put, discus, javelin, hammer throw, etc. So what is the 400-meter dash? The 400-meter dash is a long sprint event that requires athletes to run a full lap around the track at maximum speed. Elite sprinters typically take between 49 and 53 seconds to complete this race. So what does this mean? Runners must be able to withstand severe leg fatigue while performing their sprinting actions. The amount of physical stress that's placed on the body makes creatine monohydrate supplementation extremely feasible for this specific group of athletes. So now we'll get into the role of creatine in energy production. Canvas et al. 2003 and Benora et al. 2012 explain the following. ATP provides cells with the necessary energy needed for their metabolic processes. Creatine phosphate comes into play by transporting the third phosphate molecule from the mitochondrial ATP to the ATP in the cytoplasm for phosphorylation. The phosphorylation of ADP is driven by the energy that is released when creatine phosphate is split. By supplementing the amount of creatine already present in the cell, ATP production may be lengthened for a few seconds beyond its normal availability. Ultimately, this extension of ATP production can provide the energy necessary for 400-meter sprinters to continue to accelerate during their race by generating increased muscle force. The following are key terms that will be relevant throughout my entire research project. Supplementation refers to the addition of a nutrient / substance to the diet in order to compensate for a deficiency or to strengthen the body. Neuromuscular fatigue, or NMF, within this investigation will refer to the momentary decline in the performance of the lower body muscles resulting from the sprinter's inability to maintain or develop a sufficient amount of power. Sprint performance refers to how efficient a sprinter is at covering a distance of the track in the shortest possible time. Electromyography, or EMG, is a device that measures and records the electrical activity of muscle tissue. Don DeLinger, 2010. So, my research proposal problem is the following. How can track and field athletes, specifically women 400-meter dash sprinters, avoid an early onset of NMF and thus improve sprint performance? The purpose of my study is to examine whether or not long-term creatine monohydrate supplementation can be an effective ergogenic aid for trained 400-meter dash female sprinters. Hypothesis. It is hypothesized that there will be a strong relationship between creatine monohydrate supplementation and increases in muscle mass and strength amongst 400-meter dash sprinters. Specifically, long-term creatine monohydrate supplementation will provide sprinters with increases in strength, which will delay the onset of neuromuscular fatigue associated with sprinting events. Listed below are some limitations that have occurred within the literature. First off, a major limitation is not being able to have participants complete the 400-meter dash as a regular part of the research regimen because the specific event is too taxing on the body. With the 400-meter dash, it's important to know that this event takes a lot out of the runner, so it's not ideal to have research studies that require subjects to participate in this race frequently because the amount of recovery time needed will be extensive and will prolong the study even more. So instead, short bouts of sprinting are utilized to simulate a 400-meter run. These short bouts of sprinting can be used or completed on cycle ergometers or treadmills. Another limitation within the literature is that the efficacy of creatine monohydrate supplementation is highly influenced by an athlete's total carbohydrate intake, physical activity, gender, training status, and even muscle fiber type. Snow and Murphy, 2003. So this is saying that the effects that creatine monohydrate can have on a body depends on the person's overall health, their diet, whether they're male or female, and what type of muscle fibers they have predominantly. Literature review. So what will be investigated? The review of the current literature will study the effect of creatine monohydrate supplementation on the sprint performance of elite female outdoor track and field 400-meter dash sprinters. The effect that creatine monohydrate supplementation has on sprint performance is well documented in studies that examine sprinting on a cycle ergometer. Creatine monohydrate supplementation effects are also examined on protocols involving treadmills. The following studies will present the findings that were made throughout various creatine monohydrate investigations, following various exercise protocols. Ziegenfuss et al. 2002 measured the effect that a 3-day supplementation of creatine would have on the repeated sprint performance and thigh muscle volume in NCAA Division I athletes. Within this study, there were 10 male and 10 female athletes who were strategically matched and randomly assigned to either a creatine group or a placebo group. The subjects completed 6 maximal 10-second cycle sprints interspersed with 60 seconds of recovery before and after 3 days of creatine or placebo ingestion. Prior to and following supplementation, 10 contiguous transaxial images of both thighs were obtained with magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI. Through the study, Ziegenfuss et al. Found that creatine supplementation brought forth statistically significant increases in body mass, total work during the first sprint, and peak power during sprint number 2 through 6. In regards to female athletes, this study demonstrated that female subjects had a greater work and power values compared to their male counterparts during the last 3 sprints. How do these results tie into the topic at hand? Well, in this particular study, the females had better overall performance in the last 3 sprints. As a 400-meter dash sprinter, it is significant that the athlete has enough stored energy, speed, and power on their last 100 meters of their 400-meter dash. This is arguably the most tiring portion of the race. However, it is the most important because it can make the difference between coming in first place and coming in 6th place. So it's very important that this last burst of energy be maintained and established in every 400-meter dash sprinter. The following is a table that has come from the Ziegenfuss et al. Study, and it shows the results of the creatine, which is the square right here, this top part, versus the placebo group, which is the bottom group. And you can see how the overall power in watts was higher for the creatine groups throughout the study. The creatine group achieved greater peak scores during sprints 2 through 6. In addition, relative to sprint 1, peak power was significantly lower during sprints 2 and 6 of the placebo group and sprints 3 to 6 in the creatine group. Another study, conducted by Stout et al. 2000, investigated the effect of creatine loading on the onset of neuromuscular fatigue. EMG fatigue curves were monitored from the vastus lateralis muscle using the physical working capacity at the fatigue threshold test. This specific test is an incremental cycle ergometer test that requires subjects to begin cycling at 60 watts and increase by 30 watts every 2 minutes up until the subject can no longer maintain 70 revolutions per minute. This test recognizes a power output that corresponds to the onset of the neuromuscular fatigue threshold. After pre-testing, the placebo group received 20 grams of dextrose powder and the creatine group received 5 grams of creatine monohydrate. These were ingested 4 times per day for 5 consecutive days. Each subject performed the physical working capacity at the fatigue threshold test, and during each 2-minute interval, 6 10-second EMG samples were recorded from the vastus lateralis. Researchers within this study found that the average post-supplementation physical working capacity at fatigue threshold value for the creatine group was considerably higher than that of the placebo group. Overall, this study shows that creatine loading may delay the onset of neuromuscular fatigue, which, as discussed, is a necessary delay if 400-meter dash sprinters want to improve their performance in their event. The following is a chart taken from the Stout et al. 2000 study, and it shows the placebo group. So these last 2 columns we want to pay attention to. This is pre-test and this is post-test. And this is the watts, so the work. You can see that many of the values stayed the same. Some even decreased. And that was in the placebo group. Now in the creatine group, in these same columns, pre-test versus post-test, there were increases in the threshold, meaning the athlete had a higher physical working capacity after creatine monohydrate supplementation. So the values go up, and you can see the significant increases from each column to each column. Summary of literature review. Creatine monohydrate supplementation seems to be effective at delaying the onset of neuromuscular fatigue during anaerobic activity. As little as 5 to 6 grams of creatine monohydrate was effective at prolonging the start of neuromuscular fatigue during short-lasting, high-intensity exercise. Hoffman et al. 2005, Stout et al. 2000. The main benefit of increasing creatine stores is a reduction in neuromuscular fatigue by decreasing an athlete's reliance on anaerobic glycolysis and delaying lactate accumulation during high-intensity exercise. Hoffman et al. 2005. Greenhalgh, 1997, found that in order for athletes to gain the full effects of creatine monohydrate, a loading phase is recommended. The loading phase should consist of an ingestion of creatine in a solution at a rate of 20 grams per day for 5 to 6 days, broken into 4 servings of 5 grams per day. After the initial loading phase, muscle stores of creatine can be maintained by ingesting 5 to 10 grams per day. Methods. The participants in my research proposal, the target population that I looked for were young, female, elite outdoor track and field 400-meter dash sprinters. Subject must be 1, a female track and field athlete aged 18 to 30, 2, current members of a post-collegiate professional track and field team, and 3, clean of any nutritional supplement within the past 6 months, and 4, experience in the 400-meter dash race. Sampling method. After a population of qualified participants is obtained, a random sample of 10% of the population will be selected for inclusion in the study. Once a sample has been selected, participants will be notified of acceptance via email. Procedures. Location of the study will take place at FAU's Exercise Science Large Laboratory and the Boca Raton campus. The baseline test will include the physical working capacity at the fatigue threshold test, similar to the previous study mentioned. Subjects will then be randomly placed into an experimental group or a control group. The experimental group will receive a flavored powder blend consisting of 5 grams of creatine monohydrate and 20 grams of dextrose. The control group will receive a placebo consisting of 20 grams of flavored dextrose powder. These will be dissolved in 16 ounces of water and adjusted 4 times daily for 5 consecutive days before experimental testing. This will be the loading phase. After the initial loading phase, muscle stores of creatine can be maintained by ingesting 5 to 10 grams per day. This is adapted from Greenhalgh, 1997. Following the loading phase, the experimental and control groups will both participate in experimental exercise testing on designated days. Experimental testing is as follows. Subject engages in 5-minute self-guided warm-up, then begins the physical working capacity at fatigue threshold test. Subject is placed on a calibrated, electronically braked cycle ergometer, and EMG electrodes are placed on the right vastus lateralis muscle. Subject then begins to pedal at 60 watts, and then the power output is increased by 30 watts every 2 minutes until the subject can no longer maintain 60 watts. This is adapted from Stout et al. 2000. At each 2-minute interval, 6 10-second EMG samples will be recorded from the vastus lateralis. The physical working capacity at fatigue threshold will be determined by gathering the mean of the highest power output that resulted in a non-significant slope value for the EMG amplitude versus time relationship, with the lowest power output that resulted in a significant slope value. Adapted from Stout et al. 2000. The exercise protocol will be utilized 3 times a week for 6 weeks for both the experimental and control groups. Instrumentation. The Metron M981 clinical EMG dual-channel electromyograph will be used to measure and record the electrical activity of the vastus lateralis. Instrumentation. The electrode placement of the electromyography is adapted from the Stout et al. 2000 study. So, a bipolar surface electrode arrangement will be placed on the subject's right thigh over the lateral portion of the vastus lateralis, halfway between the greater trochanter and the lateral condyle of the femur. The reference electrode will be placed over the iliac crest. Inter-electrode impedance will be kept under 2000 by careful abrasion of the skin. The root mean square EMG amplitude values were calculated for 10-second time frame for each sample taken. Statistical techniques. SPSS software will be utilized to analyze the data that will be collected in the current investigation. Changes in body weight as a result of creatine monohydrate supplementation will be analyzed by using a 2x2, so treatment by time, mixed factorial ANOVA. Differences in the mean post-test physical work capacity at fatigue threshold value will be determined by using analysis of covariance with pre-test PWCFT serving as a covariate. Data will be considered significantly different if the probability is p less than or equal to 0.05. This is adapted from Stout et al. 2000. Here are my references. Thank you for your time. Have a good day.